The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed softly above Mark Sullivan's desk as he finished preparing the weekly performance report. For almost a decade, Mark had been a cornerstone of his company, Crescent Tech Solutions, climbing from a junior analyst to the position of office manager. He wasn't flashy or loud, but his consistent work ethic and approachable demeanor had earned him the respect of his team and the trust of senior leadership. It was a Wednesday afternoon when everything changed. Mark's phone buzzed with a meeting reminder, HR discussion, 2 p.m. A sense of unease stirred in his stomach. These impromptu meetings were rare, and Mark couldn't think of any pressing issues that required HR's involvement. Dismissing the nagging worry, he grabbed his notebook and headed toward the sleek glass-walled conference room. Inside, he was greeted by the somber faces of the HR manager, Rachel, and the company's operations director. A folder lay on the table between them, its presence ominous. Mark's usual confidence faltered as he took his seat. "Mark," Rachel began, her tone measured, "we value the contributions you've made to Crescent Tech over the years. However, we've decided to move in a new direction to align with our evolving corporate values." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Mark blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "I don't understand," he said, leaning forward. "My performance reviews have been excellent. What direction are we talking about?" The director cleared his throat. "We're focusing on fostering a more inclusive environment that reflects our commitment to diversity. Unfortunately, that means some restructuring." Mark's breath caught. The implication was clear. His position wasn't being eliminated because of his work performance, but because of something he couldn't change, his race. The disbelief and injustice. The rest of the meeting blurred into a series of corporate buzzwords. Restructuring, new vision, severance package. Mark barely heard them. He left the room with a termination letter and a hollow sense of disbelief. Walking back to his desk, he saw his coworkers glance away awkwardly, their expressions a mix of pity and discomfort. At home that evening, Mark sat at the kitchen table with his wife, Emily, trying to explain what had happened. She listened intently, her brow furrowing as he described the justification HR had given. "Are you saying they fired you because you're white?" she asked, incredulous. Mark didn't know how to answer. He'd supported the company's diversity initiatives, believing in their intent to create opportunity. But now he felt betrayed. The very principles he had championed seemed to have been turned against him. And in that moment, one thought consumed him. This isn't fair. Mark Sullivan sat at the kitchen table, his termination letter spread out before him like a damning indictment. His wife, Emily, paced back and forth, the sound of her footsteps echoing in their modest dining room. "This can't be legal," she said, shaking her head. "You've worked there for almost 10 years. They can't just fire you for this." Mark rubbed his temples, the weight of the day's events pressing heavily on him. "They didn't come out and say it outright," he muttered. "But that's exactly what it was. They want to hire someone who fits their diversity initiative. That's the new priority, apparently." Emily stopped pacing and looked at him, her voice trembling with anger. "They're prioritizing diversity over experience, over loyalty. It's just wrong." A search for clarity. The next day, Mark sat in his home office, scrolling through Crescent Tech's employee portal. The company's recent announcements about diversity and inclusion policies flashed on the screen. Phrases like prioritizing equity and ensuring diverse representation at all levels stood out, but none of it explained why he had been singled out. Unable to find answers, Mark decided to reach out to a former coworker, Lisa Turner, who had been laid off a few months earlier. She answered his call with a sigh. "I was wondering if you'd call," she said. "You heard?" Mark asked, surprised. Lisa chuckled bitterly. "Mark, you're not the first. They let me go under the same pretense. Told me they were restructuring and filling my role with someone who better aligns with their diversity goals. It's a pattern. You're just the latest victim." Mark felt a surge of both relief and frustration. He wasn't alone, but the realization didn't make his situation any less unjust. "Do you think there's anything we can do?" he asked. Lisa hesitated. "I don't know. I've thought about it, but I didn't want to make waves. They made it seem like speaking out would hurt my chances of finding another job. You know how sensitive these topics are now." A difficult decision. Mark's conversation with Lisa left him at a crossroads. He wanted to fight back, but he knew the risks. He spent the following days researching employment laws, poring over articles and forums discussing workplace discrimination and diversity initiatives. It wasn't long before he found a potential ally, David Rowe, a local employment attorney known for handling cases of workplace discrimination. Sitting across from David in his office, Mark laid out the details of his termination. The lawyer listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. "Let me be clear," David said, leaning forward. "Promoting diversity is legal, and in many cases necessary to address inequities. But terminating someone solely based on race, whether explicitly stated or not, is discriminatory. If we can prove this was their motivation, you have a case." Mark nodded, a flicker of hope breaking through his despair. "But how do we prove it? They never came out and said it was because I'm white." David smiled grimly. "That's where we gather evidence. Emails, performance reviews, internal memos. Anything that suggests this wasn't about performance, but about filling a quota. Building a case." Mark began sifting through his files, compiling years of performance reviews, awards, and commendations that painted a clear picture of his value to the company. He also reached out to a few trusted coworkers, cautiously asking if they had noticed any unusual hiring or firing patterns. One colleague, Nate, confided in him. "I heard whispers," Nate said over coffee. "Management's been under pressure to improve their diversity numbers. They've been discreet about it, but it's no secret that some of the recent hires have been about optics more than qualifications." With this information, David subpoenaed the company's internal documents. What they found was damning. Emails from senior management discussing the need to replace certain roles with diverse candidates to meet quarterly goals. One email explicitly named Mark's position as part of the strategy. "This is it," David said, laying the evidence before Mark. "This proves your termination wasn't about your performance. It was about meeting a metric." The social media storm. As David prepared to file a wrongful termination lawsuit, Mark made a decision that would change the trajectory of his fight. He shared his story anonymously on social media. In a heartfelt post, he described his dedication to his company, the sudden termination, and the frustration of being let go in favor of diversity goals. The post went viral within hours. Comments flooded in, with opinions sharply divided. Many sympathized with Mark, agreeing that his situation highlighted flaws in how some diversity initiatives were implemented. Others accused him of being resistant to change or failing to recognize the importance of equity. Mark stayed out of the fray, focusing instead on his case. But the public attention brought his story to the media, and soon, Crescent Tech found itself under intense scrutiny. Reporters reached out for statements, and former employees began sharing similar stories, painting a picture of a company that prioritized optics over fairness. Tensions at home. Meanwhile, the pressure of the situation took a toll on Mark's family. Emily supported him, but the uncertainty of their financial future weighed heavily on both of them. Their children, sensing the tension, began asking questions Mark struggled to answer. "Why aren't you going to work, Dad?" his youngest asked one evening. Mark forced a smile. "Because sometimes doing the right thing means standing up for yourself." Emily pulled him aside later that night, her voice low. "Mark, are you sure about this? What if it backfires? What if no one wants to hire you after this?" Mark took her hands in his. "I'm sure. If I don't stand up now, what's stopping them from doing this to the next person, or the one after that? This isn't just about me anymore." The fallout. As Mark's lawsuit moved forward, Crescent Tech responded with a statement defending their practices. They claimed their diversity initiatives were in line with industry standards and denied that Mark's termination was discriminatory. However, the mounting evidence and public backlash forced the company into damage control mode. Mark's lawyer leveraged the media attention to pressure Crescent Tech into settlement talks. The company, eager to avoid a drawn-out legal battle and further reputational damage, agreed to a significant financial settlement and committed to revising their diversity policies. The courtroom was quiet as Mark Sullivan sat across from Crescent Tech's legal team, his attorney David Rowe by his side. The tension in the air was palpable as the company's representatives shuffled papers, avoiding eye contact. Months of investigation, media scrutiny, and legal battles had led to this moment. The evidence was undeniable, and Crescent Tech knew it. David leaned toward Mark and whispered, "They're going to settle. It's a win." Mark nodded, though the victory felt bittersweet. He had fought hard to prove that his termination was unjust, and now it seemed the company was ready to admit it, if not publicly, then through their actions. A settlement reached. Later that day, the settlement was finalized. Crescent Tech agreed to pay Mark a substantial sum in compensation and issued a statement acknowledging that their diversity initiatives had been misguided in execution. They promised to review their policies to ensure that future decisions balanced inclusion with fairness. Mark felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. The financial security would help his family recover from months of uncertainty, but the scars of the ordeal remained. He had stood up for himself and others in similar situations, but it had come at a personal cost. Public reaction. Mark's case continued to spark conversations across social media and in the workplace. While some still criticized him, accusing him of undermining diversity efforts, many more saw his story as a necessary wake-up call. Companies needed to find a way to promote inclusion without alienating hard-working employees like Mark. A week after the settlement, Mark received an unexpected email. It was from an HR representative at a smaller tech firm. They had followed his story and admired his courage, offering him an interview for a leadership position. During the interview, the company's CEO expressed their commitment to fairness and balance in their workplace initiatives. "We believe in diversity," she said, "but we also believe in recognizing experience and dedication. You embody both." Mark accepted the job, grateful for a fresh start. A renewed purpose. In his new role, Mark became a vocal advocate for fair workplace policies. He worked closely with HR to implement diversity initiatives that were thoughtful and equitable, ensuring no one felt overlooked or dismissed. His experiences gave him a unique perspective, one that resonated with his colleagues and inspired positive change. At home, the tension eased. Emily smiled more, the weight of uncertainty lifting from their family. One evening, as Mark tucked his youngest into bed, she asked, "Dad, are you happy now?" Mark smiled, his voice steady. "I am, because I know I did the right thing." The battle had been difficult, but it had given Mark a renewed sense of purpose. He had turned his pain into progress, proving that fairness and inclusion could coexist, and that standing up for what's right could make all the difference.